Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to give a really long list of some summer book recommendations. I know that technically summer does not officially start until June for those of us in the northern hemisphere, but I know for a lot of people summer honestly feels like it starts in May because you're in school, you're getting a degree, your kids are in school, and then school ends for a lot of you in May, and so summer just feels like it starts basically now. And so I wanted to get this out in time for you to, if any of these books sound interesting, check them out from the library, go to your local bookstores, or stop into a bookstore and pick one of these up. I'm going to list some standalone book recommendations, some completed series, and then I wanted to have some adventure fantasy and also some that I think have settings that just feel a little bit more summery. Maybe they're a little hot, they're treks across the desert. So I have a mix of things. I'm going to start with the standalones, then go to the completed series, then go to the adventure fantasy at the end. If you have any of your own recommendations that you think are perfect for this time of year, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. And then also over on my side channel, I'm going to be taking a bunch of the recommendations from this list, and I'm going to mention some movies, some shows, some video games, those sorts of things that I think are paired really well, kind of an if you like this, try that style. But I have so many books to talk about here that I just figured it would take too long to then incorporate all of that into this video. So I'm going to have a separate video for those recommendations. And that way, if you're looking to have a fun family movie night, if you're looking for a fun date night movie to watch, or if you're just looking to maybe try out a video game that reminds you of this one particular book or series, you'll have that list as well. So I'll have that channel linked down below. Be on the lookout for that video. But all of that said, jumping into it, I'm going to start with the standalones. Within the standalones, I have a mix of different genres. So that way, maybe you're like me and you're a voracious fantasy reader and you're always looking for fantasy, but then maybe you're somebody who likes to try out other genres as well. So I wanted to have something that hopefully will be exciting for everyone. The first recommendation is one of the ones that's not fantasy, and that would be Emily Henry's books. I feel like even the titles and these UK covers, even the US covers, honestly, they all just look like the kinds of books that you would read in the summertime, and one of them is literally called You and Me on Vacation, and another one is called Beach Read, which makes me think of summertime. So they already seem fitting without knowing anything about them, but I also think Emily Henry just has a way of capturing the little things in life, the things that you reflect on that seem to you very personal, that seem very significant, but it can make you feel kind of lonely or make you feel like you're going through something, and why should you? Because it's such a little thing compared to all the other things going on. But in actuality, it's kind of a culmination of the little things in life that make up all of life, if that makes any sense. And I think if you pick up her books, you'll know what I'm talking about. There's just certain things that are very small that really have a deep, profound impact on us. Her newest one, called Happy Place, one of the themes of that story is when you've worked so hard to have a certain path in your life that you thought you were supposed to be on, and what happens when you start to recognize that maybe this thing you've been working toward for years and years that everybody has been helping you to get toward, what if that's not actually what you want for your life? Or what if you maybe want to go in a different direction with your life? How that can be extremely scary, how that can be something that's such a commitment and something that's really hard to even confront, but that so many of us, a lot of us, if it's a career shift, if it's a different place we want to live, those sorts of things are things that a lot of us go through that have affected very many of us and that will continue to go through throughout our lives. So she has a way of capturing those things while also including love stories. She also has a fair amount of friendships in her stories or familial relationships that she dives into as well. And so I just think there's this really well done slice of life sort of feeling. And then of course within all of that you get these romantic relationships. After that we have a story that is kind of middle grade young adult fantasy, and I've found myself saying when I've talked about this one that I could see this being such a fun, cute book to buddy read with your kids or with your nieces and nephews or a younger cousin or something like that. Or if you yourself are young, great. And if you're an adult like I am and you want to pick up just a really fun, adorable, wholesome adventures, good time, this book is perfect for that. And that would be A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. The title alone should give you an idea of the kind of humor you're going to get with the story, the silliness that you're going to get with the story. The setup is that we follow a young girl who has some magical powers, but her magical powers are very limited in that all they help her do is bake well. And so she works in her family's bakery, and she kind of compels the dough to do what she wants. And that's kind of it. That's all she can really do. So she thinks to herself, well, I like that my power helps me in my family's bakery, but it's not ever going to be anything that's going to help save the world or save the city, and I'll never be anybody that's that important. And at the very beginning of the story, there is a body found in her family's bakery, and due to the fact that there's a lot of people that don't know a whole lot about magic, they immediately assume that she had something to do with it, even though she's just a 14-year-old girl who's trying to make some bread. And so she's suddenly thrust into this plot that's much bigger than even this murder mystery, but it actually involves the magic users of the city and the safety of the entire city. And she's trying to not only do what she can to clear her name, but help her city in the meantime. Very, very different from that. This is very adult and very, very depressing and hits on a lot of really serious topics, but also has kind of the action component to it as well, and that would be Razorblade Tears. The story follows two fathers whose sons were killed, and their sons were both gay, and these fathers had very strained relationships with their sons. They realize now that their sons are gone, the way in which their views have made them have regrets that they will have for the rest of their lives. And so you're looking at what that does to them now, the way in which they so badly wish that they could go back and be better fathers, but also they want to get some revenge on the people who harmed their sons. And these two men, who are the most unlikely of allies, end up joining together to bring about some justice. And maybe that justice is a little bit outside the law, but they have some experience with that. The action aspect of the story, that let's get us some justice part of the story, is why I'm recommending it for the summer, because, and I'll mention this in my other video where I talk about movies that I think go along with this. This just feels like it's a Denzel Washington movie in book form. And I remember as a kid watching some Denzel Washington movies with my dad, and it's one of those things where you expect to go into an action movie and then suddenly there's a lot of heart in it as well, and you're like, whoa, I feel really sad right now. I wasn't expecting to feel this way over this action movie. And you kind of feel that way about this book as well. It's also just a great book and really hits on some like I said multiple times, some really, really heavy themes. Hitting on basically no really heavy themes. The next recommendation is back to a happier place, and that would be The Unhoneymooners. The way I set that up made it sound like I was going to pitch the book Happy Place by Emily Henry, but we already talked about Emily Henry, and I didn't mean to do that. Anyway, The Unhoneymooners is, so I mentioned with Emily Henry's books that they're romance books that have a lot of heart, and this was just a fun time. You know, it was basically just a romantic comedy in book form that's just light and fluffy and silly and funny, and you follow this woman who has a twin sister, and her twin sister, just everything goes her way and everything goes right for her, but our main character has the worst luck, and she is always just noticed because of that stark difference between where things go in her life and where things go in her sister's life. When she can't help but compare, she notices, I just have the worst luck ever. And her sister is getting married, and at the wedding, everybody gets sick. Everybody gets food poisoning except for our main character and the groom's brother, who she hates. She hates this guy. She thinks he's a complete jerk. But her sister figures, I have this honeymoon I was supposed to go on, and it's non-refundable. You might as well go. And her now husband, the groom, is telling his brother the exact same thing. And so our two main characters are stuck going on a honeymoon that was meant for their siblings, the main character's sister and then his brother. The way that I worded that made it sound like it was like they're all related, and that's obviously not the case. But they go on this honeymoon together, and they can't stand each other, and so there's a lot of tension between them, but also, you know, there's maybe some attraction too. And it was just fun, and the vacation element to this story I think is very, very fitting for the summertime. Keeping with romance, we also have the Brown sisters. This is a series of standalones, meaning each book follows an individual sister, but they do somewhat go in chronological order. You don't have to read them in chronological order, but you will see by the third book they'll make references to the love interest from the first book or the love interest from the second book. So you can start with Get a Life, Chloe Brown, if you do want to start in order. This one in particular follows a young woman who deals with chronic pain, and she is trying to navigate life having this very difficult thing impact her day-to-day life. But she decides, I don't want this to consume me. I don't want this to be something that affects my life so deeply. So I'm going to make a list and I'm going to get a life. I'm going to go out there and I'm going to try things and I'm going to be adventurous. And in her attempts to get a life, she ends up meeting a man and cuteness ensues. It's very, very charming, but also Talia Hibbert's writing is very funny. And she's often, it feels like, she's bringing you along with the characters and kind of poking fun at them, but at the same time, the characters have a lot of personality and they're very distinct, and so they're just funny. And they're fun books, they're happy books, they're light books, and they also have hints of dealing very personal things that affect the characters. It creates a lot of empathy in you when you're seeing somebody who has a very different experience from your own. And of course, the romance from book to book is quite different, as Talia Hibbert utilizes different tropes for each of the relationships. So you get something a little bit different, not only from book to book with the tropes, but then of course the sisters' personalities are all very different. So you're going to see a very different dynamic between the relationships from one book to the next. The last two standalones I'll mention are both fantasy. One of them, I believe a sequel is in the works, but has been a standalone for a very long time. It can read as a standalone, so I thought I would mention it here, and that would be The Shadows Between Us. This is a story that follows a very morally gray character who's decided that she wants some security in her life, and she wants some money, and she wants to not have to work or try, and so she decides, I'm going to try and seduce the heir to the throne so that he'll marry me. And I don't really feel like keeping everything with, I don't want to be his partner. I just want all his stuff. So once he marries me, I'm gonna get him out of the picture and just have everything for me. That's your main character. And the book is very aware that she is like this. It's not like, oh, but she's just so deeply troubled. No, it knows that she's the worst, but turns out the heir to the throne is kind of the worst too, and so it's in some ways a match made in heaven, but at the same time they butt heads a lot, and it's just very entertaining and fun, and it's fantasy, but it's a hint of romance, and it is YA, so it's not gonna maybe hit on some of the more mature scenes the way you're gonna get with Talia Hibbert and such things, but it is very engaging and fun and ridiculous, and you'll fly through it. And then the last one would be Ruination. This is within the League of Legends world, which also includes the show Arcane. You're going to see very different characters than what you saw from the Netflix show, and this takes place in a different time. You're looking at a character named Callista, who is within the military. That's what she likes, that's what she's good at, and that's all she wants to do, but she inevitably is caught up in the politics because her relative is now the new leader of their country, and he is not very good at leading, and so he requires a lot of her guidance as well as his wife's guidance, whose name is Isolde. But then one day something happens to Isolde, and he is desperate to save her, and so he sends Callista on this mission to try and find this mythical place where perhaps there are healing properties that can heal Isolde. Callista does not think this is going to be successful, but she approaches this the same way she approaches everything, which is to say that she is going to do her best to get things done. She is a very powerful person, she's a very determined person, and so she goes on this quest, and she thinks it's a foolish mission, but perhaps it's not all that foolish as well, but time is ticking, so whether or not she can get everything she needs in time, that's also a component to the story. These characters I thought were quite distinct, and I'm a very character-driven reader. I wouldn't say this feels character-driven. I would say it actually feels more plot-driven, but the balance between plot and characters I thought was very well done. It always kept the book moving forward, because if I was getting to know more about the characters, I was intrigued. If I was getting to know more about this mythical place, I was intrigued. If I was excited because the characters were now starting to face off against each other, or you were seeing characters come together, those sorts of things, I was intrigued. There was just always something that made me want to turn the page. I really, really enjoyed this one. I think it is kind of underhyped. It was a lot of fun if you're somebody who's just looking for a good, fun, kind of feels like a movie and a book sort of fantasy standalone. This one's gonna fit that very well. Now switching into some completed series. That way, if you are looking to pick something up, you have more time in the summer, and so you're thinking this is the perfect time for me to get through a series. The books that I'm going to be mentioning all of them, the series are done, so you don't have to wait for a new one to be coming out. An additional kind of fun bonus is the first 2 completed series I'm going to mention. These series are completed, but there are continuations. And so the first one would be the Red Rising series by Pierce Brown. This is a sci-fi series that follows the future, very, very far future, where society is broken up into classes, and these classes are categorized primarily by color, but it also ties a little bit into people's physical capabilities, their height, their strength, those sorts of things. The people who are at the top, who are the ruling class, are the golds, and one of the bottom classes is the reds. And you are following our main character, Darrow, as he is trying to just go about his life happy and content with what he has, but life is not going to allow him that. And so he is kind of thrust into a plan to take the system down, and he is somewhat in the center of all of it. I think that theme of, okay, maybe I don't have everything, maybe I don't even have a lot of the same privileges and a lot of the same choices available to me that the rest of society has. I might not have all those things, but I don't want to risk my life. I don't want to risk my family's lives. I'll just live like this. I'll just live with what I've got, even if what I've got isn't very good. I think when a lot of us reflect on our own situations, a lot of us are like, yeah, I wouldn't want to put my loved ones in danger. I wouldn't want to put my children in danger, my spouse in danger. And so you're seeing somebody who I think very quickly you can connect with, and you feel for him so much when he is kind of that reluctant hero, but he also is very morally gray. Some of the decisions that he makes throughout the series are not always the best ones or the most moral of decisions, but then you're also looking at, what does it actually take to break a system down? What does it actually take to provide everybody with equal opportunities in life? And what are the repercussions? Will it require violence, and how much? Also, if you're somebody who doesn't read a ton of sci-fi, I think that this series is extremely, extremely accessible. So if you've never tried out Red Rising before, I think now is a great time, especially because there is going to be a new release in the continuation series coming out quite soon. So like I said before, if you end up liking this series and you want more, you're going to get that very, very soon. It's already started. I think it's the 4th one in the 2nd series that's coming out soon. After that, we have The Shades of Magic by V.E. Schwab. This is a series that was really popular for a while, and then V.E. Schwab has gone and done a lot of other things since then. And so you've probably seen people talk about The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, Vicious and Vengeful. She has a lot of other books out, but this is the one that I think really, really, really got her on the map for a lot of readers. And with good reason, because the premise is absolutely fascinating. It's so interesting. The idea is that there are parallel worlds, and that there are a select number of individuals who can travel between these different worlds. And one of those individuals is our main character, and you are not supposed to bring things from one world into the next because it can have catastrophic consequences. And he kind of sort of accidentally does that very thing, and then suddenly the world is very much in danger. And that's the setup for the first book. The following books, this one feels more like it's his story, and then the next 2 books feel like some of our other characters. While they're not suddenly the only perspectives or anything like that, it does kind of feel like this book is one of the other characters' stories, and then this one is kind of focused in on another individual. And I do think it has a very, very compelling villainous character that ends up being one of my favorite villainous characters that I've come across. And the world itself, I just think, is really, really interesting. I'm also a big fan of V.E. Schwab's writing style and her ideas. I think she's always really, really creative. But this has been, the final chapter. We've closed the door on this story, and we have for years. And she's always hinted at there's potentially more within this world, and we are finally going to see the continuation of that this year. So, just like with Red Rising, if you like this one and you finish the series, you have that to look forward to. What's especially exciting is it will be the first book in the continuation. So if you like this, you can jump on the hype train and then be super excited, like a lot of the rest of us who have been hearing these hints for years and been like, oh my gosh, when is it going to come out? It's going to come out soon. It's very exciting. Next up, no surprise at all, I'm going to recommend the Aurelian Cycle by Rosaria Munda. This story is very political. It's more so looking at the different kinds of governments. It's looking at the repercussions of an uprising, of a revolution, and also how difficult it is to solidify a new form of government. And you're looking at the people who get caught within all of that get caught up in the difficult decisions, that get caught up in the consequences, and get caught up in the violence. So you're looking at two main characters, one named Lee and one named Annie. Before this one pivotal revolution took place, Annie's family was very, very poor and very mistreated by the upper class. And then you're looking at Lee, who was previously a part of this upper class, and his own family is responsible for the hardships that were thrown at Annie's family. So when a revolution happened, both Lee and Annie ended up in an orphanage, and they grew to become very, very close friends, kind of unaware of each other's pasts initially, but as they grow up and as they get older, they're starting to realize where each came from, and it's putting definitely a lot of weight on their friendship. It's something that they don't necessarily want to come to terms with because they care so much for each other, but their families are tied to a lot of the trauma that they went through. But you're also looking at the fact that despite everything Lee's family went through during the revolution, he still believes in this new form of government that's come about, as does Annie, because it's actually providing people like her an opportunity to earn more in life through their work, as opposed to being stuck in a certain kind of circumstances based off of your birth. However, this new form of government has a wide range of issues all on its own, and so you're seeing some people who did not like the revolution, they're starting to poke holes in this new form of government, and it's making Lee and Annie question each other, question what they value, and question if this new form of government is indeed the best way to go about things. And mixed in with all of that, you have dragons. It is fantastic. Can't recommend this trilogy enough. I think the stakes get raised with each book, and the relationships between the characters are done so incredibly well. You're gonna not just care about Lee and Annie, but you're gonna care so much about some of the side characters. And when things go wrong, things go wrong. There are incredibly high stakes in this story, and those stakes are very personal to the characters, but it affects so many other people as well. Can't recommend the series enough. It's fantastic. Much kind of happier and lighter than that, we have a duology, and that would be the Blade of Secrets duology. Its sequel is called Master of Iron. This story follows a young girl who is terrified of interacting with people. She has a lot of social anxiety. She second guesses herself a lot. It's a theme throughout the duology that I think so many people are going to connect with and relate to, and I really, really liked the way in which the author depicted our character's anxiety. But she is somebody who has a magical ability to create these amazing weapons, and she is commissioned to make one for someone, and upon creating this weapon, she comes to find that the person who commissioned this weapon to be made is going to use it for very bad things, and she realizes, I cannot allow this person to get their hands on this weapon. So her and her sister, who she's very close to, leave everything they've ever known because they know that it will keep the rest of society safe. And along this journey they go on, there are two other individuals who accompany them. I think the relationship between our main character and her sister is fantastic. I also really like the relationship between all of them, the other characters that come into the picture. It is going to feel a little bit lighter, a little bit less heavy than some other books that I've mentioned on this list. It is technically young adult, but I don't know what it is. There's just something about how Trisha Levenseller writes that I always find to be so captivating and engaging. And while I'm not necessarily a target demographic, because I'm not 12 to 18 years old, which is the young adult age range, I still just have such a good time reading her stories. I like the way she writes the characters. I like the way she writes the dialogue. I think she captures that feeling of trying to find yourself, of whatever it is that you struggle with individually, even if it's not the same as what the character's going through. She just has a way of writing her characters where it just evokes so much in you, and it makes you feel so empathetic, and I really, really enjoy this duology. She's also the same author who wrote The Shadows Between Us. Very different plot lines, but also both very, very fun. After that is a series that I have frequently recommended for, it feels like any season of the year, because it is so atmospheric, but it is a very engaging, fast-paced, quick story, and I kind of feel like that's very fitting for summer as well. So basically, read the series whenever. It's good. And that would be The Queens of Renthia. The first book is The Queen of Blood. This is in a forest setting. The main character is somebody who saw something horrific happen to the village that she lived in when she was a child, and ever since then she has been determined to learn more about the magic of their world. The horrific things came at the hands of these creatures. They're known as spirits. They're these things that are deeply tied and connected to the forest. They have a very strong instinct to protect the forest, and human beings, by living within the forest, inevitably kind of harm it as well, which means that these spirits want to kill this threat, which means they want to kill human beings. They want to do it efficiently and quickly. This typically doesn't happen because there is a human being who ends up becoming the queen, who has this magical ability to hold the spirits in check. And because our main character saw that there was some kind of crack in the queen's power, that something's going on because these little things in these little villages are happening more and more often. And so there's sort of a mystery within the story as well as to what's going on with the queen and her power. Our main character, as an adult or a young adult, enters into this school to learn more about her magic. She eventually has a mentor figure that is helping to teach her to learn more about the forest. So the setting is fantastic. The forest setting is why I frequently I recommend it for fall or even springtime, because I just think that those seasons, the plant life is more significant in those seasons in a lot of ways, whereas summer is like, ugh, it's hot. So it is atmospheric. But like I said, it flies by. Each of the books in the series is quite short, and you are going to get introduced to new characters and also new stakes within each book. I'd say the second and first books were actually my favorites. The third one was my least favorite, which is always a little bit of a bummer because you want the series to end on a bang. But there's something different to like within each of the books, and so I always recommend this trilogy to anybody who is looking for a fun, fast-paced adult fantasy read that is also accessible for young adult readers as well. It does sometimes get categorized in either, so I think that this is very accessible for a lot of different readers. A little less accessible, the next recommendation would be the Winnowing Flame trilogy by Jen Williams. I've recommended this quite a number of times, but it is still quite underhyped. It deserves so much more love. The setup for this story is that we follow this epic fantasy world where we have this particular race of beings that are somewhat elven-like. They're known as Eborans, and they have maintained their near immortality by feeding off of the sap of this one magical tree. However, this tree has essentially started to die, and with it, the Eboran race is starting to die off, as well as the sap that they have always fed off of is no longer available to them. They do discover that human blood produces a lot of the same effects in them as the sap, so they start feeding off of humans, but this does create an illness in them known as the Crimson Flux, so it would seem that the Eborans are going to die off no matter what. There's only so many left by the time you start the story. One of our main characters is an Eboran. He had no part in a lot of the violence that occurred in the past, but he does recognize that his race is dying out and he doesn't want to sit around and watch all of them die. He wants to live his life, and so he sets out to go explore more of the world, and in doing this he ends up allying himself with a individual who's kind of like an archaeologist. Her name is Vintage. She's amazing. And then also they end up joining forces with a witch who has some interesting powers. The way the witch powers work in this world is a little different than perhaps you've seen in other stories, but these three band together and they are trying to help Vintage discover secrets of the past, and these secrets turn out to be very, very important for the safety of their entire world. It is fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. It is probably going to be unlike anything you've ever read. It is great. I love it so, so much. Next up, we have the manga series Fullmetal Alchemist. This is one of my favorite series of all time. I cannot recommend it enough. It is absolutely fantastic. We follow these two young brothers, Edward and Alphonse, both of whom have lost parts of themselves, or all of themselves basically, after a failed experiment using alchemy to try and bring their mother back from the dead. What happened as a result of that was Edward lost an arm and a leg, and his brother lost his entire body, and his soul has been attached to a suit of armor, and now these brothers are trying to find the Philosopher's Stone in hopes that it can restore their bodies. And that barely scratches the surface, because while that is the main motivation for their goals, they, in the pursuit of their goals, end up interacting with so many other characters, and there ends up being stakes that are much higher than either of these two could have ever anticipated. You follow so many different individuals who have such amazing backstories. The political consequences of a war from the past creates a lot of really, really interesting, morally gray characters. It makes you question your own heroes, if they're really as good as you thought, and then characters that when you're first introduced to them, you think these people are awful. When you really get to know more about them and you really get to know more about the history of their country and what has been done to them, you're like, I kind of understand why you are the way you are and why you have the views that you have. And there's just so much to it that is absolutely fantastic. Truly, the synopsis, it really does barely get into the meat of the story. You cannot ask for a better paced story, better character relationships, better character development. There's just so much to the story that is amazing. If you have been wanting to try getting into manga, I definitely recommend this. It's also incredibly funny. It has a full range. It has devastating moments, it has dark moments, it has hilarious moments, it has stupid, funny moments. It's got everything you could ask for. Really, truly, this would be a perfect time to try and get into Fullmetal Alchemist if you have not already. And then I will, of course, obviously mention this in the other video I do, because there is an anime adaptation called Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood that follows the manga almost perfectly, and it's amazing as well. So if you're a little intimidated by trying a manga out and you want to start with the anime, you can start with the anime. It is very, very good. After that, we have the Witcher series by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is a story that follows a monster hunter named Geralt of Rivia. He was modified in order to be better at doing his profession of fighting monsters. But within their world, monster hunters, despite the fact that they rid people of these very frightening and often violent creatures, they are looked down upon because of the fact that they do this as a profession, not out of the goodness of their heart. And therefore, if you can't pay, they're not going to do the job. However, Geralt is somebody who often sees that the monsters that he is fighting are not necessarily the worst aspects of their world. In fact, it's usually human beings who are more monstrous. And so there's a lot of themes of what human beings are capable of, the way in which the pursuit of power, of trying to conquer other groups, of trying to attain more influence, how that makes human beings kind of the worst of all. And Geralt is somebody who's trying to just do his job and stay out of it, but inevitably he gets caught up in it when his destiny is intertwined with a young girl named Ciri. I know that this is an incredibly popular series, partly because of the success of the Witcher 3 video game, which is the best, and then also because the Netflix adaptation, which isn't good, but you have probably heard of Witcher at the very least, and maybe you've watched the show and been curious, or maybe you've played the game and been curious. The books are not the easiest to follow because Andrzej Sapkowski has a way of having this bird's eye view and zeroing in on what feels sometimes like the most random of characters, and you go into it expecting to just kind of focus on Geralt and focus on Ciri and focus on Yennefer, but you do get all these other people that give you a little bit of a snapshot of the bigger picture. It's like if you put all of the photos together, all the snapshots together, then you see the way in which everything is connected, and Geralt's kind of at the center of it, and he is impacted by the events of all these other things. But I do think that because it is so hyped, I do think that because there is multiple adaptations at this point of it, that summertime would be a great time to check out the series, especially because it's also quite long. And so it can be a little bit of a commitment. If you have more time in the summer, now would be a good time to give it a go. After that, we have Shadow and Bone. This has risen in popularity as well, thanks to an adaptation. And so this one, I would say, is much easier to get into than something like Witcher, because instead of having this one long series and having a writing style, or a storytelling style, I should say, that's a little difficult to get into, this one is super easy to get into. So the original trilogy, which is just 3 books, you can easily jump right in. It's going to feel like the younger end of young adult. We follow this young girl who just was somebody who made maps, and she was an orphan. She's never really had a ton of friends. She never really fit in. And then one day she discovers that she might actually have the key to destroying something called the Shadowfold, which is this literal wall of shadow that divides their country and has weakened them both within their own trade and their economy and the way that people travel throughout their country, but also it has led to surrounding countries trying to attack and take advantage of this weakness. After that, we have the Seven Realms Quartet. This is a story that follows initially two main characters, Han and Reza. Han is somebody who's kind of a street urchin, and then Reza is somebody who is in nobility. Han is a little rough around the edges, whereas Reza is in a more luxurious environment, but as a result is quite pampered and a little spoiled. And neither of these characters are necessarily the most likable initially, which you might be thinking, why are you recommending this series if the characters are unlikable? But what I mean by that is that they start out young and they start out kind of not really coming into their own just yet, but they feel very real and they feel like people that have so much room to grow, but their environments are currently affecting them very deeply. And you are seeing as they are growing into adults throughout the quartet, how they come into their own, how they find who they are, what they stand for, their principles, and then you are seeing the way in which they use those principles to be a part of the bigger political picture. Initially, Han and Reza's stories hardly interact with one another. They hardly connect. And the first book, it feels quite separate. So the first book is kind of a strange reading experience because it's almost like you're following two different storylines. And then it's throughout the rest of the quartet that you see these two kind of weave together, get to know each other, and then they end up sort of working toward a common goal and a common good. And there are some political adversaries that are looking to try and take what should be Reza's birthright, but these characters have to grow a lot before they can even go up against these enemies. I really, really like this quartet. I think Cindy Williams-Chima has a way of writing her stories where it feels very, very close to your main characters initially, and then as the story progresses, the stakes get bigger and bigger. So by the end, it can start to almost feel like high fantasy or epic fantasy. Not necessarily because the world is so huge, but because you're opening up more and more with each book. However, because you have that strong foundation with the characters from the beginning, it means that you care very deeply for them as they are engaging in whatever these stakes are. So I think that it's a great reading experience as far as the whole goes, but I do think that you're going to have to probably be a little bit patient with this series because it is kind of such a strange beginning. We have one more completed series to talk about before we transition into our adventure stories. The reason I'm mentioning this one last is because it is the perfect transition on over to the adventure stories, as this completed series feels very adventurous, and that would be the Shadow of the Fox trilogy. This follows two main characters, Yumeko and Tatsumi. Yumeko is a kind of mischievous but a little bit naive character who she ends up having some secrets involving this very, very powerful scroll, or a piece of this very powerful scroll. And then another character is kind of a samurai ninja-like character who his clan sends him on a quest to find this particular scroll. And obviously, as you would guess, this forces these two characters' paths to cross. He does not know, Tatsumi, that Yumeko has some knowledge of the pieces of these scrolls, and she knows that he can get her to the place that she needs to go if she convinces him that all of the answers will be at this place that she needs to go. So she's kind of taken advantage of her mischievous streak, and the two of them end up on this quest where they interact with a lot of other characters along the way. The first book especially, felt so episodic. It felt like I was watching an anime, and that the various different places they go felt like various different episodes within a show. But you would think that would create for a limited amount of time for you to care about these different places that they are arriving at. But instead it was the opposite. It was like I got so many very impactful things that were occurring along the way of their journey. And by the end of the story, by the end of the trilogy, the stakes are incredibly, incredibly high, and it has a very, very bittersweet ending that is somewhat unexpected. It's very explosive. The last book just kind of feels like one giant boss fight, and it makes you kind of miss back when they were on their journey. Now finally getting into the adventure stories. The first two not only have that element to them, but they have that trek across the desert feel, which I think is perfect for the summer because it has that, oh my gosh, it's so hot. component to the story, and that would be the Stardust Thief and the Spice Road. The Stardust Thief is a retelling of 1001 Nights, and then Spice Road follows a character who has always lived within this magical city, but in order to try and find out information about her brother, who she previously thought had died, she now has to leave this place, cross the desert, and go into the rest of the world. The rest of the world has never been able to find this magical city in the desert because they believe that they are destined to protect this magical city and that it is through a higher power that it's been kept hidden from everyone. But what this means is getting across the desert not only makes it difficult for people to find them, it makes it hard for them to get out. The adventure component to the Stardust Thief, I think, is also exceptionally well done. You get a lot of great character moments as you are exploring these different 1001 Nights stories. It's very, very cool. I liked the way that the author incorporated these stories into a bigger narrative. However, peak adventure fantasy. We have the adventures, in the title, of Amina al-Sirafi. This is the most adventurous of adventurous fantasy. We follow a woman named Amina al-Sirafi who has this extravagant reputation for being this captain to this ship, and some people believe that she is magical, and some people think she's jinn, and some people think that she's a horrible human being, and there's all these different stories about her. And in actuality, she is just a person who is very good at what she does, and she now wants to settle down and just spend life with her daughter. However, she has a lot of enemies, so she kind of has to settle down very quietly and be very secretive in where she's living. But there's one last job that beckons her back to the sea, and she cannot resist. After that, we have the book Godkiller and the book Art of Prophecy. Art of Prophecy has fantastic world building. The various different settings that you encounter throughout the story are so cool and so unique and so vivid. But the core of the story is that we are looking at a young man who is the chosen one. That's what all the prophecies say. However, when the mentor character comes into the picture and she meets this young man, she realizes there is no way that this pathetic kid is going to save us from anything. I better step in and get him into shape. And they end up having a very unlikely of bonds. However, your typical chosen one story, the typical progression of that kind of a plot line is flipped on its head. Godkiller follows not a monster hunter like Geralt, but rather a god killer, somebody who is killing various different gods. The way that the gods work in this story, the way that they get power is through shrines, and when people worship the gods, it makes them more and more powerful. However, there was a war in the past that affected the amount of gods that are left, and the ones that do still exist, you now have people whose professions it is to stamp them out. And one day, a young girl who has what is supposed to be impossible, she has a bond to a god. She cannot separate from this god or go a certain distance away from them without her and it being affected physically. She seeks out this Vega, this god killer, in hopes that she will know something about how to break this bond. If you are looking for a fun, action-packed, adventurous sci-fi, I highly recommend the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson. This really is I cannot stop turning the page because there's always something going kind of sci-fi. And what I was saying about Red Rising, if you're somebody who isn't accustomed to sci-fi, this is a great one to get into it because it is very character focused. The idea is that we're following this young woman named Spensa, this teenage girl who she primarily has been living her life underground on this planet because there is this alien species that attacks them, and they only attack the surface, and they primarily attack from the sky. The only way that human beings on this planet can fight back is through pilots. And Spensa has dreams of becoming one herself. And so we're looking at her attempts to become a pilot. She faces a lot more obstacles than she otherwise should have because of the fact that her father, who also was a pilot, famously abandoned during a very important battle. He was shot down as a result, and everybody now thinks that Spensa is going to be a coward, just like her father was. So she not only has to fight through the challenges of becoming a pilot, but she has to fight through the reputation that her father left behind. And it is very, very, very action-packed. It moves very, very quickly. It has great character moments. Spensa is somebody who is very loud in her personality, and you see why she is the way she is. I think the character kind of dissecting her is part of what makes the story so well done. But with each book, you are seeing the universe, I could say, I suppose, open up. And you're getting more and more and more out there, literally and metaphorically. It is a lot of fun, very adventurous feeling, and the flight aspects of the story are exceptional. Last for today, we have Engines of Empire and its sequel, Engines of Chaos, and eventually the other books that will be in this series. This is the least adventurous of the adventure fantasy. I kind of am just including it because I think it's amazing and I want more people to read it. It is fantastic. You follow a family who is a part of this very significant, notable guild called the Hawksburg Guild. And you are looking at a epic fantasy world where you are seeing religion and tradition clash with technology, and you're seeing both of those things clash with magic. The way all of that is done is exceptional, but the characters, where they end up, because you are following a wide amount of different perspectives, that's where I'm kind of pulling in the adventurous feeling. It's less like Amina al-Sirafi, where you're following a character as they desire to go on an adventure, and it's more that they, through horrible circumstances, end up in different places, and so it kind of, I'm just looking for an excuse to mention it. It's really good. I have said before that this truly is the closest thing I've come across to Game of Thrones. It has more of the advancements in technology than Game of Thrones, so the world itself is a little different, but the way that the story progresses and the different characters and the shocking moments and the twists and turns, I've never read anything or come across anything that's reminded me more of Game of Thrones. I really like it, and I really think more people should read it, and it's very edge of your seat, and it's very intense. It starts a little slow because it's got to introduce you to everybody, and it's got to get you to understand the stakes and understand who hates who and why. It's got to introduce you to all of that first, and then once you've got all of that, it's just race to the finish line. And I'm like, I'm not at the finish line yet because the series isn't done, so I'm just sitting here waiting. It's very, very good. I can't recommend it enough. Please, please, please check out Engines of Empire. That's it for some standalones, completed series, and adventure stories. Feel free to leave your own recommendations. I'll have more information about all of these in the description bar down below. And then, like I said, for a lot of these, I'll have some movies, shows, video games, those sorts of things that you can check out to go along with them. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.